accidentally falls into a vampire lair, and just as he is on the brink of death, the vampire queen, driven by lust, approaches him. She slashes her arm and personally feeds her blood to the man. As the blood flows, the man's body is completely transformed, undergoing a revolutionary mutation and evolution. Thus, the world's first human vampire who does not gather like was born. He then leads a vampire army and attacks a family in the wilderness. The mother, upon seeing this, immediately pushes the dining table aside, rips up the old carpet, and opens a long-sealed basement, quickly hiding her daughter inside. She and her husband, without hesitation, choose to stay outside, leaving only one message: no matter what, do not come out. As soon as the wooden door closes, a fierce battle erupts inside, but it doesn't take long before these sounds abruptly stop, followed by the father's heart-wrenching screams. Sadly, the daughter is eventually discovered by the vampires, and the entire family is lost. Since ancient times, humans and ghosts, vampires, have always been sworn enemies, unable to coexist. Vampires, with their powerful physiques and swift movements, can move freely in the darkness, like ghosts, appearing to sleep. However, they have one fatal weakness: they fear the sunlight. For thousands of years, the war between the two factions raged on without end. It started with cold weapons, evolved into the use of firearms, and eventually escalated to the point of nuclear warfare. Yet even so, the two sides were evenly matched, with neither yielding. The resulting destruction turned Earth into a barren wasteland, leaving the land in ruin, life in despair, and the nuclear radiation making crop cultivation extremely difficult. The remaining humans, on the brink of extinction, could only huddle in a church-governed holy city to survive. This was because the church had trained a group of exorcist priests specifically to deal with vampires. They bore the symbol of the cross on their foreheads, each one a master of their craft, capable of defeating hundreds at a time, like walking through an empty space. Their physical prowess far exceeded that of vampires, rendering the vampires powerless and turning them into a rare species slaughtered by the exorcists. Thus, humanity emerged victorious in this long war, and the remaining vampires were exiled to remote detention zones. After the war, the world order changed dramatically. The church, with its influence during the war, gradually rose to become the power center of the world. However, over time, the church began to fear these exorcists, worried that their strength might threaten the authority of the church. Therefore, the church not only disbanded this once legendary exorcist squad but also suppressed them, leading to the once heroic saviors being stigmatized, criticized, and even having their freedom of movement restricted. From revered warriors, they were reduced to the outcasts of society. When they walked the streets, people avoided them as if they carried the plague. Some gave them hateful looks, while others stared at them with disgust and contempt. The church had slowly corrupted, becoming a cult. They unscrupulously spread evil religious teachings to the masses, repeatedly emphasizing that only by absolute obedience to the church could one gain salvation and peace, all in the name of God. This ideological infiltration and control caused the public to be completely swayed by the church on a spiritual level. As the church's influence spread and expanded across society, its reach had infiltrated every aspect of people's lives, and as the strongest fighting force on earth, the leader of the exorcist squad could do nothing about it. After his retirement, he could only silently endure the public's cold stares and rejection. His daily routine consisted of hard labor and attending countless sermons in the market, listening to the monotonous teachings and mechanical blessings from the archbishop. Then one day, a sheriff from Augustine came to him and delivered the tragic news about his niece, who had been attacked by a vampire. With this news, the legendary demon hunter did not hesitate for a moment, immediately heading to the church to beg the 5 archbishops to restore his powers as an exorcist so that he could set off and rescue his loved ones. However, if the vampire attack were to be exposed, it would undoubtedly cause mass panic among the public and shake the church's long-established reign. Naturally, the archbishop refused and planned to conceal the matter, even threatening the exorcist that if he left the holy city, he would be killed on sight. The archbishop's tone was cold as he reminded the exorcist, to betray the church is to betray God. Even when one of the older bishops stepped forward to plead for him, trying to convince the others with his past achievements, the final judgment still left no room for negotiation. Once outside the church, the old bishop urged him not to do anything foolish, but the exorcist had already made up his mind no one would stop him from rescuing his family. Reluctantly, the old bishop gave the order to send to capture him. Though it was not his will, he had no other choice. The exorcist finally broke the sacred oath he had once sworn. From that moment on, he decided to sever all ties with the church and would no longer serve them. He quickly turned around and, with lightning speed, killed several armed guards behind him. Returning to his quarters, the exorcist retrieved his old weapons, donned his battle gear, and, riding a motorcycle, sped away from the once sacred but now corrupt and decayed holy city. Along the way, he passed the towering statues of the 5 archbishops, reaching high into the clouds. After days of sleepless travel, he finally crossed the vast desert and arrived at his destination. But by then, his brother was already lying on a deathbed, his life hanging by a thread. With his last breath, his brother left behind his final words before passing away.
І прошу тебе, благаю, знищи їх.
After burying his family, the exorcist officially set out on his revenge journey to save his niece and began preparing for battle. He etched a cross symbol on the surface of every bullet's tip with a sharp dagger, but these bullets were not for him. Exorcists always use cold weapons, and these were actually for the sheriff. It turned out that the exorcist had long suspected the sheriff would follow him in secret, so he prepared in advance, carefully marking the bullets and arranging them neatly on the table. When the sheriff stepped into the room, his gaze was immediately drawn to the bullets on the table. He smiled slightly and picked up one of the bullets, tossing it into the air. A throwing knife followed, striking the bullet in mid-air, splitting it in half. Thus, the sheriff passed the test and joined the exorcist's team. Meanwhile, back in the holy city, the church's high officials had already learned of the exorcist's betrayal. In their eyes, this was a blatant challenge to the authority of the church, a grave act of treason. As a result, the high archbishop summoned 4 of the exorcist priests who had once fought alongside him, each one an elite force of the church. The archbishop ordered them to bring Priest back to the holy city for judgment at all costs. At this moment, Priest and the sheriff, after analyzing the scene, gradually pinpointed the hiding place of the vampires. Manshaw Reserve No. 98. This place had once imprisoned countless vampire captives, but now it had become a haven for the fallen. The so-called fallen were actually exiles abandoned by the church, living on the fringes of society. Because they lacked protection, many had to submit to the rule of vampires in order to survive, becoming their slaves. Once they accepted vampire blood, they would turn into half-human, half-demon ghoul slaves. And even the chickens found all around were often vampire dinners. Priest and the sheriff tried to get clues about Priest's niece Lucy from these mutated beings, but they acted insane. Unwilling to reveal any useful information, the two decided not to waste any more time and headed straight to the underground fortress, the prison where the vampires were held. Due to the perpetual lack of sunlight, the vampires had built their nests here, and the entire space was filled with their excrement, emitting a nauseating stench of decay. As they went deeper, the bloodstains on the door and the old marks on the floor caught their eyes. No wonder there were no guards here. They had all been slaughtered by the vampires. At this moment, a pair of sinister eyes were peering at them through the gaps in the prison door. Priest suddenly kicked the heavy door open, attempting to force information about his niece's whereabouts. But this ghoul slave was only responsible for serving next to the vampire's iron coffin during its slumber, knowing nothing about other matters. Suddenly, a sharp, screeching metallic sound came from outside, the sound of metal scraping against the ground. As the noise grew closer, a group of ghoul slaves emerged from the shadows of the corridor. Though they managed to kill one ghoul slave, the sheriff was still injured, with a deep gash on his arm. He immediately called out for Priest's help but got no response. In desperation, he had no choice but to flee the fortress. However, as soon as he showed himself, the ghoul slaves outside swung their axes at him. He quickly realized it was all a trap, set for their arrival. Backed into a corner, the sheriff hurriedly pulled out his handgun, but just as he was about to fire, Priest suddenly descended from above, stopping him. These rabble didn't deserve to waste holy silver bullets on them. Priest left one ghoul slave alive, intending to extract useful information from him. However, before he could get any answers, nightfall quickly descended, and the entire area was immediately shrouded in darkness. The vampires hiding underground began to stir. One coffin after another was pushed open, and in an instant, shadows of vampires swarmed out of the doors. Despite their sharp fangs and deadly mouths, thousands of years of evolution had granted them the ability to sense human magnetic fields, allowing them to precisely locate prey, count their numbers, and predict their movements. They could move effortlessly in the dark. However, in this tense moment, Priest remained remarkably calm. He calmly took out a Bible and began reciting scriptures in a low voice. With a sudden shake of his hands, 8 crosses levitated into the air, instantly opening into sharp blades before the vampires had a chance to react. Priest, moving at an astonishing speed, shot out silver crosses, and those hit by them immediately screamed in agony, shattering into pieces. As the vampires continued to swarm, Priest was caught in a fierce battle, unable to spare a moment. Seeing this, the sheriff had no choice but to draw his gun and try to block the remaining vampires. However, he had overestimated his marksmanship, failing to anticipate that the vampires could move twice as fast as the bullets, and in the blink of an eye, they were already in front of him. Just when life and death were at stake, Priest finally found the chance to save him. The last vampire, realizing it was doomed, let out two furious roars and turned to flee into the darkness. Seeing that its master had abandoned it, the ghoul slave stopped resisting and immediately revealed Lucy's whereabouts. However, as soon as she mentioned that Lucy had been taken to the creek, the previously fleeing vampire suddenly returned, clearly to silence her. Fortunately, Priest was quick on his feet and grabbed the vampire's ankle, forcefully pulling it down. Seeing the vampire struggle and try to escape again, Priest gave no chance, quickly leaping up and pulling the vampire down with him into the underground fortress. The sheriff, anxious, hurriedly pulled out his gun, nervously aiming at the entrance to the underground fortress. Just as he braced himself for the worst, a familiar figure crawled out from the darkness, and the sheriff's heart finally relaxed. After this series of events, Priest's suspicions grew stronger. He believed that the Vampire Queen might be behind a massive conspiracy, from the fact that Manshaw Reserve had once held 50 vampires to now only leaving 6 malnourished, emaciated ones. Various ominous signs indicated that a major crisis was on the horizon. According to the information provided by the ghoul slave, the ancient Lair Sun Wall to the west might hold the key to the next clue. That place had been the largest vampire stronghold destroyed during the war, and it could be where the other 44 vampires were relocated. In other words, if they could find these missing vampires, they would find Lucy. So, the two headed west, with the surrounding desolate ruins. Speaking of past carnage, they did not stop, crossing the remnants of war until they reached the ancient lair. This lair was strange in shape, with numerous openings of various sizes scattered all over it. They climbed the rugged path, eventually arriving at an entrance. Inside, the structure was a maze, incredibly complex. Looking down, it was pitch black, an underground kingdom shrouded in darkness. Although no vampires were visible, Priest remained cautious. 10 years ago, he had led a group of priests into this dark lair on a crucial mission, but just as they were about to reach the Vampire Queen, they were ambushed. Vampires appeared from all directions in the dark and launched a deadly attack. The attack came without warning, and the team was caught off guard, suffering heavy casualties. During the retreat, Priest watched helplessly as his close friend slipped from his grasp and was dragged into the murky darkness by vampires. This tragic event had been caused by his own carelessness. That mission became an everlasting pain in his heart. This time, he told the sheriff to stay put while he threw a flare down the lair, then jumped in after it. Once at the bottom, he discovered that the passage below was even more maze-like, difficult to navigate. Priest had no choice but to follow his instincts and grope his way forward in the dark. Just then, a shadow flashed before him, quickly disappearing into the darkness. Priest immediately gave chase. He thought he was about to face a vampire, but when he finally caught up and saw the figure clearly, he realized it was a priestess, someone he had once fought alongside. It turned out that she too had grown intolerant of the oppressive rule of the church. The commandments and orders, seemingly sacred and inviolable, had stripped her of everything. So, she decided to abandon the church, deliberately separating from the other 3 priests, and came to find Priest to warn him. While they were talking, gunfire suddenly erupted from the sheriff's location. They rushed over, and as expected, they found that, just as Priest had predicted, the lair still housed vampires. This particular vampire was massive, with strong muscles, clearly a high-ranking member of the vampire race. Priest quickly drew his silver cross and threw it at the creature, but it only left a shallow wound on the monster. At that moment, the priestess lit a flare and raised it high, successfully distracting the monster's attention from Priest. She then dashed through the narrow tunnels, evading pursuit. However, the monster's resilience was surprising. Despite crashing into the rocks, it only paused for a moment before quickly getting back up. Facing such a powerful vampire, Priest knew it was time to use his signature move. He clasped his hands together, took a deep breath, and gathered all his strength before charging at the vampire. The priestess understood immediately and picked up 2 coffin boards from the ground. Throwing them toward the vampire, Priest used the boards as stepping stones to leap into the air, and with his weapon drawn, he cleaved the vampire midair, with the monster's heavy body crashing to the ground. The place was filled with dust. The dust settled, and the three of them realized that the abandonment of this lair might just be a facade. The high-ranking vampire's guard indicated that deeper secrets were hidden here. Filled with questions, they continued exploring the damp, dark underground passage. Soon, Priest discovered a passage that was entirely different from the others. It showed no signs of age, clearly dug recently. They followed this path and soon came across a towering new lair. Its scale was astonishing. At the other end, Priest's sharp senses detected subtle changes in the air currents. Following this new breeze, they quickly found a huge opening. This opening led to Jericho District, where the other three demon hunters had gone. At this moment, an unrecorded black military train, like a ghost, silently and without a sound, entered the Jericho train station. The old man was suddenly startled awake by the vibration as the train pulled in. He opened his pocket watch and saw that it was already 11:05 p.m. With a bit of confusion, he picked up his oil lamp and walked out of the booth to check the situation. But after calling out a few times, no one responded. So, he walked towards the carriage door to investigate. But in the next second, he was torn to pieces by the fleeting vampire, his blood staining the entire platform. Immediately after, a mysterious man wearing a top hat slowly walked toward the platform. The mysterious man directed the vampires aboard the train to surge into the town, turning the entire village into a hell on earth. Screams and explosions echoed continuously. Flames rose into the sky, and people ran in panic. But he himself, listening to a requiem, watched the chaos unfold as if conducting an apocalyptic symphony. At this moment, three demon hunters finally rushed to the scene. After witnessing the devastation of the town, they immediately decided to step forward and act on behalf of the heavens. Among these three demon hunters, the strongest was the one in the middle. With a powerful aura, he swung two silver crescent blades, which had slain countless vampires. Executing a fierce and domineering combo, the vampires dared not approach, as every strike seemed capable of wiping out all evil. But to their surprise, the mysterious man simply threw a punch, and the hunter was sent flying backward, crashing to the ground heavily. He struggled to rise but found a deep pit in his chest and realized his heart had been ripped out by the mysterious man. In the end, he collapsed into a pool of blood. The mysterious man issued an ultimatum to the remaining two hunters: either submit or face death. By dawn, the three priests finally arrived in the Jericho district, but what lay before them was desolation and silence. The once bustling town had become a wasteland, the streets empty, and the vampires had long since fled. The three hunters were tortured to death, their bodies nailed to crosses, humiliatingly left to perish. Killing three priests. What kind of vampire could do such a thing? Priest mused as he looked at the blood-stained pocket watch on the platform. Considering there were no vampire hideouts around the Jericho district, their rapid appearance and disappearance could only mean one thing: the train. The railway here was the terminus leading directly to the Holy City, the only transportation route in the entire area. With this realization, Priest's mind suddenly cleared, and he finally understood the Vampire Queen's plot. It turned out that due to prolonged industrial pollution and environmental degradation, the sky over the Holy City was shrouded in a thick layer of pollutants, preventing sunlight from penetrating through the gray canopy, leaving the entire city in perpetual twilight. For vampires, this was the perfect opportunity. The Queen had seized upon this, instructing the mysterious man to kidnap Lucy, luring Priest out of the city to rescue her. This way, Priest would have to send other experts to pursue him, leaving the city's defenses vulnerable, providing an opening for the vampire's next move. Without Priest, the most powerful exorcist, the Holy City would be like a defenseless lamb, ready to be slaughtered. Time was of the essence. Priest had no time for grief. He could only perform a simple cremation ceremony for his fallen comrades, bidding them a final farewell. After the ceremony, the three set out once more, as they had predicted. On the horizon, the black, cracked vehicle carrying a load of vampires sped toward the Holy City. To intercept the enemy, Priest decided to split up. He assigned Priestess to place explosives ahead on the track, destroy the train, while he himself charged toward the middle of the train, ready to personally confront the mysterious man in the top hat. The sheriff was responsible for sneaking in from the rear of the train, searching for Lucy, forming a three-pronged attack. However, the ghost slaves on the train spotted the swiftly fleeing Priestess and immediately mounted motorcycles to chase after her. They quickly caught up with Priestess and surrounded her. In a critical moment, Priestess activated the nitrous boost system, and the motorcycle shot forward like an arrow, leaving the pursuing ghost slaves far behind. At that moment, the sheriff opened a door at the rear of the train, and a chilling air immediately hit his face. There, countless vampire embryos hung suspended in midair, as if frozen seeds. They slowly wriggled in their growth fluid, as though they were about to hatch at any moment. Just then, as Priest jumped onto the train, the abandoned motorcycle slammed into the side of the carriage, causing an explosion. The violent shock threw the sheriff off balance, and he accidentally triggered a series of chain reactions by touching a vampire embryo, awakening all the dormant vampires. Priest was unaware of this. When he finally climbed onto the train's roof and turned back, the figure before him left him stunned. To his surprise, the mysterious man who had kidnapped Lucy was his longtime friend, Black. It turned out that Black had been taken to a demon lair years ago, where he was given the vampire queen's blood, transforming him into a new species of human vampire, superior to both demon hunters and vampires. As for betraying humanity in the church, it was because he sensed that the souls of vampires were pure. In his eyes, vampires were driven solely by survival instincts, without the complex moral dilemmas of humans. They cared only about survival, with no distinction between good and evil. In contrast, human souls were shackled by morality, law, and emotions. Black believed that human souls were not pure enough, being hypocritical, always using morality as a mask for their selfish desires. Thus, he decided to overthrow the teachings, assist the queen in reclaiming power, and establish a new order dominated by vampires. The ideological clash between the two quickly escalated into an unavoidable showdown. In an instant, they both leaped into the air, launching their attacks. Black, with the queen's blood flowing through him, had already undergone a transformation, far surpassing Priest in every ability. Meanwhile, Priestess stood with her hands clasped in prayer as the approaching vampires drew near. When the enemy closed in, she suddenly opened her eyes, delivering a powerful flying kick that knocked one of the enemies to the ground. Immediately, her figure flashed. She picked up the weapon on the ground and turned around to slay another enemy. Finally, Priestess drew a rope dart from her waist, and with her skilled handling, in less than 2.5 minutes, she had killed all the ghost slaves, leaving none alive. Unfortunately, the ghost slaves took advantage of her moment of carelessness and set off a timed bomb. To ensure the plan proceeded smoothly, Priestess decided to take a personal risk. At the same time, the battle between Priest and Black reached a boiling point. To be precise, Priest was at a disadvantage. Even though he drew his dagger and slashed, his strikes all missed. On the other hand, Black delivered an elbow strike that sent Priest flying, then jumped up, his fists carrying immense power, crashing down. The destructive force was so great that even the steel plate was dented. Priest barely dodged the heavy blow, but couldn't withstand the relentless, storm-like barrage that followed. Gathering all his strength, Black poured all his might into his final punch. The force was so tremendous that it sent Priest flying out of the carriage. At this height, it was almost certain that death was inevitable. Black stood at the edge of the carriage, watching the direction where Priest disappeared, with no joy of victory on his face, only a deep, complex emotion. Meanwhile, the sheriff was still moving through the vampire incubation carriage. Suddenly, a mature vampire dropped from the sky. He quickly retaliated with gunfire, but the sound of the shots startled the surrounding vampire larvae. With the sound of breaking, the vampire larvae rushed out, creating a terrifying scene. The sheriff hurriedly turned and fled to the next carriage, using a knife to block the vampire's pursuit by wedging it in a tight spot. When he looked back, he saw Lucy right in front of him, but she was controlled by the ghost slaves and taken toward the next carriage. The sheriff immediately drew his shotgun, preparing to break through the door, when Priest suddenly crawled up from the bottom of the carriage. Though somewhat disheveled, it was clear he was still alive. As the two spoke, the vampire army had already crashed through the carriage door and swarmed inside. At the crucial moment, the sheriff used his shotgun to blow away the first vampire that charged, then fired 3 shots at the ceiling, causing sunlight to pour down and form a barrier, blocking all the vampires. Seizing the opportunity, the two quickly moved through the carriages and finally found the compartment where Lucy was being held. However, at this moment, Black suddenly launched a surprise attack from above, knocking Priest flying with a single slap, then kicking the sheriff out of the compartment. Seeing this, Lucy took the opportunity to break free from her restraints, quickly grabbed an oil lamp, and struck the ghost slave with it before drawing a dagger from her body and swinging it at Black. Black caught the attack, praising Lucy for being as brave as her father, then glanced at Priest. It turned out that Lucy was not Priest's niece, but his biological daughter. Black slapped Lucy, knocking her unconscious on the floor, and then pinned Priest against the wall with a counter-strike. The intense pain washed over Priest's entire body, and everything went black as he lost consciousness. Black planned to leave him to perish in the flames, ending the grudge once and for all. Then, he grabbed Lucy and leapt up, jumping through the skylight. As the train was about to crash into the walls of the holy city, with the current speed, simply destroying the tracks seemed futile. The train's inertia was too great. Even if the tracks were destroyed, it could still potentially crash into the holy city due to its massive momentum. So, Priestess decided to take a final gamble, strapping all the explosives onto a war chariot and charging at full speed toward the train. By crashing into it, the explosives would detonate, completely destroying all the carriages. Priest, still unconscious, began to regain his awareness. Although he had broken his vow, his faith deep down had never wavered. Priest gritted his teeth, enduring the ripping pain in his shoulder, and pulled the dagger embedded deep into his flesh out. At this moment, the train was less than 100 meters away from the holy city, and Black's plan seemed on the verge of success. He was preparing to turn Lucy into one of his own. Just as the fangs were about to sink into her neck, Priest acted in time, throwing a silver cross dart with all his strength. At that moment, before Black could react, a rumbling sound came from the tracks, and Priestess' figure appeared in the distance. She was speeding along the tracks, so fast it seemed like she was prepared to sacrifice everything. Seeing this, Priest quickly exerted force, tightly holding Lucy in his arms. At the moment of impact between the two trains, he released his grip and leaped with Lucy toward the tracks. The explosion's force was earth-shattering, instantly turning everything to ashes. Black's voice disappeared in the firelight, dissolving into nothingness. The entire train, fully exposed to the sunlight, was now vulnerable. Even if some vampires had survived the flames, they couldn't escape the deadly sun. Under the judgment of light, everything fell silent. The sheriff, who had been kicked out of the carriage, was riding a ghost slave's motorcycle, speeding toward the battlefield. Fortunately, Priest's physical condition was strong, and under his protection, Lucy was safe and unharmed. Since stepping into the church and becoming a demon hunter, he had severed all emotions and focused entirely on his exorcism mission, fully aware that choosing this path meant immense sacrifices. But for the greater good, he had to give up his family, leaving his wife and daughter in the care of his brother. Now, with his brother gone, he was no longer bound by the church. Priest could finally lay down his burdens, return to his family, and make up for the regrets of the past. As the black smoke gradually cleared, Priestess emerged from the aftermath of the explosion. The people of the holy city, unaware of the catastrophe that almost struck them, continued to devoutly listen to the prayers of the bishops in the church. Completely unaware of the huge crisis that had just brushed past them, Priest walked straight into the church, and the clamor of the bishops stopped abruptly. In the stunned gazes of everyone, Priest pulled out the freshly severed vampire head from a bag and threw it in front of the Pope. Causing an uproar, Priest tried to convince the old archbishop, telling him that a battle for the survival of humanity was about to erupt. But the archbishop had long been blinded by power, his thoughts stuck in a time of peace. Believing that the holy city was impenetrable and that no threat could touch them, he refused to believe that the vampires were returning. Faced with the corruption within the church and the indifference of the people of the holy city, Priest, with a heavy heart, turned and left in disappointment. But he did not give up. Outside the city, Priest and Priestess met up and decided to go to different holy cities, spreading the word of preparation for war, recruiting all willing demon hunters to be ready for the impending vampire invasion. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.